Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. The gnawing in my stomach was a constant companion. It was a dull ache at first, then a sharp, insistent clawing. It was the sound of my body eating itself alive. I was 10 years old, but my reflection in the tarnished mirror was that of a scarecrow. Skin stretched over jutting bones, eyes hollow and haunted, hair dull and lifeless. I was a shadow, a ghost in my own home. The Royce Manor was a monument to excess. Marble floors gleamed, chandeliers glittered, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and gourmet meals. But in the shadowed corners, in the forgotten attic room where I slept, there was only the gnawing hunger and the chilling silence. My sister Vivian was the sun, the center of their universe. She was beauty and grace, laughter and light. She was given everything. Lavish dresses, exquisite toys, a room filled with sunshine and laughter. I was the moon, a pale imitation, a forgotten afterthought. I watched them from the shadows, my family, their faces flushed with mirth as they dined on delicacies I could only dream of. Roasted meats, creamy sauces, decadent desserts. A feast for the senses, a constant reminder of my own deprivation. "Eleanor, darling," my mother would say, her voice dripping with false concern, "you really shouldn't eat so much. You wouldn't want to spoil your figure. Such a shame about her appetite." I'd hear her think. Such a pity she takes after her father's side of the family. My father, a man of business and bluster, barely acknowledged my existence. I was an inconvenience, a blemish on his otherwise perfect family portrait. "Eat your vegetables, Eleanor," he'd bark, pushing a plate of wilted greens towards me. "They'll put some meat on your bones, ungrateful child." He'd think, his eyes filled with disdain. "She doesn't appreciate what we provide." The scraps were my sustenance. The leftover crusts of bread, the discarded bones from the roast, the bruised fruit deemed unfit for their delicate palates. I ate in secret, in the darkness of my attic room, the shame of my hunger a bitter taste in my mouth. And then one night it happened. The gnawing became a roar, a consuming fire that ravaged my weakened body. I collapsed on the cold floor, my vision blurring, my limbs trembling. "Mama," I whispered, my voice a faint echo in the vast emptiness of the house. "Papa." But they didn't hear. They were downstairs, their laughter echoing through the halls, their voices raised in a toast to their perfect lives. I closed my eyes, the darkness a welcome embrace. The gnawing finally subsided, replaced by a chilling numbness. And as my life slipped away, I heard the faint strains of music drifting from the ballroom below, a cruel serenade to my silent demise. They found me the next morning, a forgotten doll discarded in the attic. There were no tears, no recriminations, just a quiet disposal of an inconvenience. My death was a footnote in their lives, a minor disruption to their carefully curated world. And as they moved on, their laughter echoing through the empty halls, I vanished into the void. The shadows, a forgotten ghost in a house of excess. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not the cloying sweetness of lies, but the musty scent of old wood and dust, dancing in a sliver of sunlight. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the dimness of the attic room. The same sloping ceiling, the same threadbare rug, the same chipped porcelain doll staring blankly from the corner. But something was different. I sat up, my heart pounding. My body felt lighter, stronger. The gnawing hunger that had been my constant companion was gone, replaced by a faint, unfamiliar rumble. I looked down at my hands, no longer skeletal claws but the plump, childish hands of a 9-year-old. Memories flooded back, a torrent of neglect and deprivation, the lavish meals downstairs, the echoing laughter, the gnawing emptiness in my stomach, my death, the chilling indifference of my family. But I was alive. I stumbled to the dusty mirror, my reflection staring back at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. It was me, but younger, healthier, a year younger if the faded calendar hanging on the wall was to be believed. I'd been given a second chance, a do-over, a chance to rewrite the script of my life. A surge of anger, hot and potent, coursed through me. This time I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't waste my breath on a family who couldn't see past their own gluttony and greed. This time I would disappear, become a ghost in their perfectly curated world. Let them wonder, let them worry. Let them realize too late the treasure they had discarded. I packed a small bag with the few meager possessions I owned. A worn copy of Alice in Wonderland, a chipped teacup, a faded photograph of my grandmother, the only person who had ever shown me kindness. Then I slipped out of the attic room, down the creaking stairs, and out of the Royce Manor, leaving no trace of my existence. The world outside the gates was vast and unfamiliar, but it was also filled with possibility. I wandered for days, scavenging for food, sleeping under bridges, learning to survive on my own. I met other outcasts, other forgotten souls who taught me the harsh realities of life beyond the gilded cage of my childhood. And then one day I stumbled upon a small, unassuming restaurant tucked away in a quiet alley. The aroma wafting from within was intoxicating. A symphony of spices, a tantalizing blend of sweet and savory. I peered through the window, my stomach growling in anticipation. Inside, a man with flour-dusted hands and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes was creating magic. He moved with a grace and precision that mesmerized me, his hands transforming simple ingredients into works of art. This was it. This was my destiny. I would become a chef, not just any chef, but the best. I would master the art of food, the language of flavor, the power of presentation, and I would use it to craft my revenge. My family, with their insatiable appetites and their callous disregard for my suffering, would become my unwitting audience. They would feast on my creations, unaware of the hidden messages, the subtle reminders of their cruelty woven into every bite. This time, I wouldn't starve. I would feast. And they, the ones who had denied me, would be left to choke on the bitter taste of their own regret. The kitchen was my sanctuary, a world of stainless steel and simmering sauces, where the air hung heavy with the scent of spices and possibility. Chef Antoine, a man who seemed to exist solely within the confines of his culinary domain, was my guide, my mentor, my tormentor. "The onion, Eleanor," he'd bark, his voice thick with a French accent. "It is not merely a vegetable, it is a symphony, a tragedy in 3 acts." He demonstrated his knife, a blur as he sliced, diced, and julienned with a precision that bordered on surgical. Tears streamed down my face, not from the pungent fumes, but from the sheer intensity of his passion. Antoine wasn't just a chef. He was a sorcerer of taste. He taught me how to coax emotions from ingredients, how to weave stories with flavors, how to control minds with the perfect balance of sweet and savory. "The perfect dish, Eleanor," he'd explain, his eyes twinkling, "is not just about the ingredients. It is about the experience, the anticipation, the memory, the emotion." He showed me how to plate a dish with the elegance of a painter, how to pair wines with the intuition of a sommelier, how to orchestrate a meal with the drama of a playwright. "Food is a language, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice softening, "and you, my dear, are learning to speak it fluently." I devoured his lessons, my mind a sponge soaking up the knowledge he imparted. I learned the science of cooking, the chemistry of flavors, the art of presentation. But more importantly, I learned the psychology of food, the way it could evoke memories, trigger emotions, and manipulate desires. "A pinch of salt can bring tears to the eyes," Antoine would say, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "A touch of sugar can unlock a forgotten childhood, and the right combination of flavors, that can make a man confess his deepest secrets." I practiced tirelessly, my hands becoming an extension of my will, my senses sharpening with each passing day. I experimented with textures, played with aromas, and explored the subtle nuances of taste. I learned to create dishes that were not just delicious but also evocative, transformative, unforgettable. And as my skills grew, so did my understanding of the power I wielded. Food was not just sustenance, it was a weapon, a tool, a means to an end. With the right ingredients, the right techniques, the right presentation, I could control minds, manipulate emotions, and orchestrate experiences that would linger long after the last bite. My family, with their insatiable appetites and their callous indifference, would be my ultimate test subjects. I would craft a meal that would not just satisfy their hunger, but also expose their cruelty, their greed, their utter lack of humanity. They would feast on my creations, unaware of the hidden messages, the subtle reminders of their sins woven into every bite. They would savor the flavors, revel in the experience, and then slowly, agonizingly, they would realize the truth. This was not just a meal. It was a reckoning, a culinary symphony of revenge conducted by a chef who had learned to wield the power of food with the precision of a surgeon and the artistry of a magician. The island was a jewel, a verdant emerald rising from the sapphire embrace of the Mediterranean. I found it by chance, a forgotten paradise nestled amidst a cluster of lesser islands. It was here, on this secluded haven, that I would build my stage, my culinary coliseum. Years of tireless work, of honing my skills under Antoine's watchful eye, had culminated in this moment. I traveled the world, absorbing culinary traditions, mastering techniques, and building a reputation as a chef whose creations were not merely meals but experiences. Eleanor Roy, the name whispered in hushed tones in the finest dining circles, synonymous with innovation, artistry, and a touch of mystery. The restaurant, a masterpiece of modern architecture, blended seamlessly with the island's natural beauty, was christened Final Course. The name was a double entendre, a promise and a threat. It was the culmination of years of training, a stage set for my grand performance. Every detail was meticulously planned. The dining room, with its panoramic ocean views and intimate seating arrangements, was designed to both impress and intimidate. The staff, handpicked for their discretion and unwavering loyalty, were trained to anticipate every need, to cater to every whim, to create an atmosphere of unparalleled luxury and subtle unease. The menu was my masterpiece, a culinary symphony composed of dishes that were not just delicious but also deeply symbolic. Each bite a carefully crafted note in the symphony of my revenge. I would use the finest ingredients sourced from around the globe to create a meal that would tantalize their taste buds, while simultaneously twisting the knife in their gut. The bread course, a seemingly simple offering, would be a stark reminder of their denial. The finest flour, the purest water, the most delicate touch, but no bread, just an empty plate, a symbol of the emptiness they had forced upon me. The main course, a decadent display of roasted meats and seasonal vegetables, would be a mirror of their gluttony. The same ingredients they had wasted, the same flavors they had devoured while I starved, now presented in a way that would both entice and repulse them. And the final course, the piece de resistance, would be a grotesque yet exquisite reimagining of the scraps I had been forced to consume, a dish that would challenge their perceptions, force them to confront their cruelty, and leave them with a taste of their own bitter medicine. This was not just a meal. It was a performance, a carefully orchestrated symphony of flavors and emotions designed to expose their hypocrisy, their utter lack of humanity. And I, Eleanor Roy, the chef, the artist, the avenger, would be the invitations were sent in elegant calligraphy on thick cardstock, delivered to the very people who had turned a blind eye to my suffering, my parents, my sister, their friends, their enablers. All would be invited to partake in this final course, this last supper, this reckoning. As I stood on the precipice of my revenge, the island bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, I felt a surge of anticipation, a thrill of excitement mixed with a touch of trepidation. The game was afoot, and I, the chef, was ready to serve. The invitations were works of art, each one a testament to my meticulous planning. Thick ivory cardstock edged in shimmering gold leaf, elegant calligraphy announcing an exclusive dining experience at Final Course, the restaurant whispered about in hushed tones among the elite. No address, just a date, a time, and coordinates to a private airstrip on a secluded island. They were more than just invitations. They were summons, a call to the privileged, the entitled, the very people who had dined on delicacies while I starved. My parents, of course, were at the top of the list. Their insatiable appetites for the finer things in life, their endless pursuit of social status, made them the perfect targets. Vivian, my sister, the golden child, would be there too. Her vanity, her obsession with appearances, would make her downfall all the more satisfying. And then there were the others. The hangers-on, the social climbers, the ones who had turned a blind eye to my suffering while they gorged themselves on my family's excess. The invitations promised a dining experience unlike any other. A feast for the senses, a journey into culinary ecstasy. They hinted at exotic ingredients, innovative techniques, and a chef whose reputation preceded her. They spoke of a night of indulgence, of exclusivity, of an opportunity to be part of something truly extraordinary. My family, with their insatiable appetites and their craving for the finer things in life, couldn't resist. I watched from the shadows as the invitations arrived, delivered by courier in discreet black envelopes. I saw the flicker of excitement in my mother's eyes, the smug satisfaction on my father's face, the childish glee in Vivian's voice as she gushed about the exclusivity of the event. This is going to be amazing, Vivian thought, her mind a whirlwind of designer dresses and social media posts. I can't wait to tell everyone I dined with the mysterious Eleanor Roy. An excellent opportunity to network, my father mused, his thoughts already calculating the potential business deals to be made. This Royce woman seems to have quite the influential clientele. Such a shame about Eleanor, my mother thought, a fleeting pang of guilt quickly overshadowed by her anticipation for the event. But at least something good came of it. This invitation is quite the coup. Their obliviousness was almost comical. They had no idea who was behind the invitation, who was orchestrating this elaborate performance. They were like lambs to the slaughter eagerly walking into the lion's den, unaware of the fate that awaited them. As the date of the event drew closer, I felt a surge of anticipation, a thrill of excitement mixed with a cold, hard determination. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on the final act of my revenge. The island shimmered in the afternoon sun, a vision of manicured perfection. Lush greenery spilled down to pristine beaches where turquoise waves lapped gently against the shore. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers and the distant tang of salt, a paradise meticulously crafted for the pleasure of the elite. My guests arrived by private jet, their faces flushed with excitement, their eyes wide with anticipation. They were a collection of the privileged and the powerful, drawn to the final course by its reputation for exclusivity and culinary excellence. They stepped onto the tarmac, their designer luggage trailing behind them like moths to a flame, lured by the promise of luxury and indulgence. My family, of course, was among them. My mother, draped in jewels and furs, her face a mask of practiced elegance. My father, his expensive suit straining against his expanding waistline, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a proprietary air. And Vivian, my sister, a vision in shimmering silk, her phone already capturing every detail for her adoring followers. They didn't recognize me, not yet. I stood on the balcony overlooking the arrival scene, a silent observer, my face hidden in the shadows. To them I was just the chef, the orchestrator of their culinary dreams, the woman whose name was whispered in hushed tones, whose creations were said to be life-altering. I watched as they were escorted to their private villas, each one a haven of luxury and comfort. They would be pampered, indulged, their every whim catered to. It was all part of the experience, the carefully crafted illusion of paradise. But beneath the surface, a darker current flowed. The island was a gilded cage, a meticulously constructed world where I controlled every aspect of their experience. They were my guests, my prisoners, my unwitting participants in the grand performance of my revenge. As evening approached, they gathered in the dining room, a masterpiece of understated elegance. The walls were lined with dark wood, the tables adorned with crisp white linens and gleaming silverware. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the clinking of glasses and the hushed whispers of the guests. They took their seats, their eyes scanning the room, their senses heightened by the promise of the extraordinary. They were unaware of the hidden cameras, the strategically placed microphones, the watchful eyes that observed their every move. This was my stage, my domain, and they, my family, my tormentors, were about to become my audience. The performance was about to begin. The waiters moved with practiced grace, their footsteps silent on the polished floor. The first course arrived, presented with a flourish that bordered on theatrical. A beautiful platter adorned with delicate orchids and sprigs of rosemary was placed in the center of each table. But the platters were empty. A collective gasp rippled through the room. My family, their faces etched with confusion, exchanged bewildered glances. The other guests, accustomed to a more traditional dining experience, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Where's the bread?" my father muttered, his voice laced with annoyance. "Can't a man get a decent slice of sourdough around here? What is this, some kind of joke?" I heard Vivian think, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the table.
"I'm starving."
I watched from the shadows, a ghost in my own creation, a smirk playing on my lips. The bread course was a lesson in deprivation. A beautiful platter, a promise of sustenance but no bread. A reminder of the countless meals I'd watched them devour while my stomach growled with hunger. A young waiter, his face carefully schooled into an expression of polite concern, approached my father's table. "Sir, I understand your confusion. The chef has chosen to present this course as a reflection on the nature of expectation." Reflection? Expectation? My father scoffed internally. Just bring me the damn bread. But there was no bread, only the empty platter, a stark reminder of the emptiness they had forced upon me. The guests, their initial confusion giving way to a growing unease, picked at the orchids. Their laughter strained, their conversations stilted. My mother, ever the socialite, attempted to maintain a facade of composure. How interesting, she said, her voice a touch too high. Such a unique concept. What is Eleanor trying to prove? She wondered, a flicker of unease in her thoughts. This is all rather, uncomfortable. Vivian, however, was less subtle. This is ridiculous, she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm going to complain to the manager. I can't believe I flew all the way out here for this. She fumed internally. Where's the food? I'm going to lose my Instagram followers if I don't post a picture of something edible soon. I observed their discomfort with quiet satisfaction. The seeds of doubt had been planted. The carefully constructed walls of their privilege were beginning to crumble. They were starting to realize that this was not just a meal. It was an experience. An experience designed to make them confront the consequences of their actions. The bread course, with its absence of bread, was just the beginning, the first subtle note in a symphony of revenge. A taste of the bitterness they had forced me to swallow. And as the waiters cleared the empty platters, I knew that the real meal, the meal of truth, was about to begin. The main course arrived with a flourish, a symphony of aromas and colors. Platters piled high with succulent roasted meats, glistening vegetables, and fragrant herbs were placed before the guests. The presentation was exquisite, a testament to my years of training. A feast for the eyes. I promised a culinary symphony, but beneath the surface, a darker truth lay hidden. This lamb, I announced, my voice amplified by the hidden microphones, is marinated in a reduction of forgotten fruits, a tribute to the bounty that often goes to waste.
Forgotten fruits.
My mother thought, a flicker of unease crossing her face. That sounds familiar. The vegetables, glistening with a delicate glaze, were a carefully curated selection. These root vegetables, I continued, were salvaged from the brink of spoilage, a testament to the resilience of nature and the ingenuity of the chef. Salvaged. Vivian's brow furrowed. Why does that word sound so unpleasant? The guests, their initial apprehension from the bread course fading, eagerly dug into the main course. The flavors were exquisite, a symphony of textures and aromas that danced on their palates. But with each bite, a subtle unease began to creep in. The lamb, tender and flavorful, carried a hint of bitterness, a subtle reminder of the forgotten fruits, the ones left to rot in their overflowing pantry while I scavenged for scraps. The vegetables, perfectly cooked, retained a faint earthiness, a whisper of decay, a testament to their near demise. The main course was a mirror of their cruelty, a dish crafted from the same ingredients they'd allowed to spoil, the same flavors they had disregarded, now presented in a way that was both irresistible and unsettling. Each bite was a taste of their indifference, a reminder of their callous disregard for my suffering. I watched as their enjoyment slowly soured, their laughter becoming strained, their conversations punctuated by awkward silences. The realization was dawning, a creeping awareness of the hidden message woven into the fabric of the meal. This is uncanny, my father thought, his appetite waning. These flavors, they're stirring up something unpleasant. I feel sick, Vivian thought, pushing her plate away. There's something wrong with this food, something rotten. Their discomfort was my reward. The seeds of doubt planted during the bread course were now taking root, growing into a thorny vine of guilt and unease. The carefully constructed walls of their privilege were crumbling, revealing the ugliness beneath. And as the main course drew to a close, I knew that the final act, the climax of my culinary revenge, was about to begin. The last course, the most grotesque and the most exquisite, would be the final nail in their coffin, the ultimate taste of their own bitter medicine. The final course arrived under a hush, a stark contrast to the flamboyant presentation of the previous dishes. A single stark white plate was placed before each guest. On it, a delicate arrangement that was both grotesque and strangely beautiful. A brittle shard of burnt bread, meticulously sculpted into the shape of a withered flower. A smear of overripe fruit, its sweetness tinged with the tang of decay. A sliver of gristle, its texture both repulsive and strangely compelling. and a single perfect pearl onion, its layers translucent, its flavor sharp and pungent. This I announced, my voice echoing through the silent room. It is a dish inspired by memories of resourcefulness, of the unexpected beauty that can be found in the most humble of ingredients. My family stared at the plate, their faces a mixture of confusion and disgust. The other guests, their appetites long since vanished, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between the dish and me. "What is this?" my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "It looks disgusting." "It can't be," Vivian thought, her eyes widening with horror. "It can't be what I think it is." But it was the final course, the culmination of my revenge. A dish inspired by the meager scraps I'd been forced to consume, transformed into a culinary masterpiece. But the beauty was a facade, a mask hiding the bitter truth. Each bite was a forced confession, a taste of their own inhumanity. The burnt bread was a reminder of the stale crusts I'd scavenged from their waste bins. The overripe fruit was a mirror of the bruised apples and moldy berries they deemed unfit for their consumption. The gristle was a testament to the discarded bones and scraps of meat I'd gnawed on in secret. And the onion, the sharp, pungent onion, was a symbol of the tears I'd shed, the hunger I'd endured, the pain they had inflicted. The silence in the room was deafening. My family, their faces pale and drawn, finally understood. The carefully constructed walls of their denial crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. They saw me not as the forgotten daughter, the inconvenient burden, but as the chef, the artist, the avenger. My father, his face contorted with shame, pushed his plate away. I don't understand," he stammered, his voice trembling. "It's her," he realized, his mind reeling. "It's Eleanor. She's come back to haunt us." My mother, her eyes filled with tears, tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "Eleanor," she choked out. We failed her. She thought, the weight of her guilt crushing her. We abandoned her. We let her die." And Vivian, the golden child, the one who had always had everything, finally saw the truth. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and understanding. "It's true," she thought, her world shattering. She was starving while I had everything. The psychological breakdown was complete. They had feasted on my pain, and now they were choking on their own guilt. The final course, the scraps of truth, had broken them. And as I watched them crumble, I felt a surge of triumph, a bittersweet satisfaction that was both exhilarating and heartbreaking. I stepped out of the shadows, the spotlight finding me as I moved towards the head of the table. The silence was deafening. My family stared at me, their faces a mixture of horror and recognition. They finally knew who I was, and the truth, like a poison delicacy, was beginning to choke them. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling around me. "I trust you've enjoyed the meal." Father, his face pale and etched with shame, averted his eyes. "Eleanor," he choked. I interrupted, my voice laced with ice. "Or should I say you all? A collective effort, wasn't it? A symphony of indifference conducted with masterful precision." My mother, her carefully crafted composure shattered, began to weep. "Oh, Eleanor," she sobbed. "We never meant." "Never meant what?" I asked, my voice rising. "Never meant to neglect me? Never meant to let me starve? Never meant to discard me like a piece of rotten fruit?" Vivian, her face streaked with tears, looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and remorse. "Eleanor," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I never knew." "Never knew?" I scoffed. "You lived in the same house. You ate the meals I was denied. You wore the clothes I could only dream of. How could you not know?" The truth hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of guilt and shame. They had no excuses, no justifications. Their silence was a confession, an acknowledgement of their cruelty. "You feasted while I starved," I continued, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You laughed while I cried. You lived in luxury while I withered away in the shadows. And now you dare to sit here in my restaurant and pretend that you care." My words were a lash, each syllable a strike against their carefully constructed facades. They squirmed in their seats, their eyes darting nervously, their attempts at justification dying in their throats. "This meal," I said, gesturing to the grotesque remnants of the final course, is a mirror, a reflection of your own inhumanity. Each bite a reminder of the scraps you threw me. The scraps I was forced to consume while you indulged in excess. Their silence was deafening. The truth, like a poisoned arrow, had found its mark. They were trapped in their own gilded cage, their past sins now laid bare before them. And as I looked at them, their faces etched with shame and regret, I felt a surge of triumph, a bittersweet victory over the family who had abandoned me, the family who had let me die. The tension in the room was palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on the assembled guests. My family, their faces pale and etched with shame, sat frozen in their chairs, their eyes darting nervously between me and the grotesque remnants of the final course. Now, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife, comes the moment of truth, the moment of choice. I stepped back from the table, my gaze sweeping across the faces of my tormentors. You have two options, I continued, my voice cold and measured. You can leave, walk away from this table, from this island, from the truth that has been laid bare before you. You can try to forget what you've seen, what you've tasted, what you've done. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Or, I said, my voice rising, you can stay. You can finish this meal, this final course, this grotesque testament to your own cruelty. You can swallow your guilt, choke down your shame, and accept the consequences of your actions. The choice was theirs. Walk away, pretend they hadn't seen the truth, try to bury their guilt beneath layers of denial. Or they could stay, finish the meal, and face the consequences of their actions. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the ragged breathing of my family and the nervous shuffling of the other guests. The air crackled with tension, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the room. What would they choose? My father, his face contorted with a mixture of shame and defiance, clenched his jaw. His eyes flickered towards the door, then back to me, a battle raging within him. My mother, her tears flowing freely, seemed to have shrunk in her chair. She looked at the plate before her, her stomach churning at the sight of the grotesque offering. And Vivian, her face pale and drawn, stared at me with an intensity that was both unsettling and strangely familiar. She seemed to be searching for something in my eyes. A glimmer of hope, a hint of forgiveness. The other guests, their initial curiosity replaced by a growing sense of unease, shifted in their seats, their eyes darting nervously between my family and me. They were caught in the crossfire, unwilling participants in this family drama, this culinary reckoning. The tension was unbearable. The silence stretched, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against their fragile composure. And as I watched them struggle with their choices, I felt a surge of power, a cold, hard satisfaction that was both exhilarating and terrifying. One by one they broke. My father, the man who ruled his household with an iron fist, pushed his plate away with a trembling hand. His face, once so proud, was now etched with lines of shame and defeat. He mumbled something about a sudden illness, a pressing engagement, and fled the room, his escape a silent admission of guilt. My mother, her sobs echoing through the silent room, followed suit. She couldn't bear to face me, couldn't bear to confront the consequences of her own neglect. Her departure was a retreat into denial, a desperate attempt to cling to the illusion of her perfect life. The other guests, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, followed their lead. They mumbled apologies, offered excuses, and scurried out of the dining room, eager to escape the suffocating weight of the truth. But Vivian, she stayed. She sat at the table, her eyes fixed on the grotesque offering before her, her face pale and drawn. The tears streamed down her cheeks, but there was a newfound resolve in her eyes, a determination that I had never seen before. She picked up her fork. The room held its breath. I watched, my heart pounding, as she slowly lifted the fork to her lips. The burnt bread, the overripe fruit, the sliver of gristle. She tasted it all, each bite a bitter reminder of the life she had lived, the life she had taken for granted. She understood. She understood the depth of their cruelty, the magnitude of their betrayal, and she accepted it. It's disgusting, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. But it's also true. She looked at me, her eyes filled, led with a mixture of shame and admiration. You were right, Eleanor, she said, her voice trembling. We were blind. We were selfish. We failed you. Her words were a balm to my wounded soul, a validation of the pain I had endured. But they were also a condemnation, a recognition of the irreparable damage that had been done. Vivian's bite was a turning point. It was a rejection of the life she had known, the life of privilege and indulgence. It was an acceptance of the truth, the ugly, bitter truth that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. And as I watched her, my sister, the golden child, the one who had always had everything, finally faced the consequences of her family's actions, I felt a surge of compassion, a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for redemption. The dining room was almost empty now, the remnants of my revenge scattered across the pristine white tablecloths. The remaining staff moved about quietly, clearing the plates, their faces carefully blank. Only Vivian remained, her head bowed, tears tracing paths through the carefully applied makeup on her cheeks. I approached her, my footsteps echoing in the sudden stillness. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression a mixture of shame and a strange newfound understanding. "Vivian," I said, my voice softer now, the anger that had fueled me for so long finally fading. "This wasn't about hurting you. It was about making them see, making them feel what they did." She nodded, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "I understand, Eleanor."
I trulido.
I reached out, a hesitant gesture, and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "You are just a child," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You didn't know any better." "But I should have," she countered, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen. I should have done something." There was a long silence, filled only by the crackling of the dying fire in the hearth and the distant sound of the waves crashing against the shore. The weight of the past, the years of neglect and cruelty, hung heavy between us. "What happens now?" Vivian asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Now," I said, a flicker of a smile playing on my lips, "you live with it. You learn from it. You become better." I turned to leave, the weight of my revenge lifting, replaced by a strange sense of emptiness. As I reached the door, I paused, the image of my family's shattered faces imprinted on my mind. "You feasted while I starved," I whispered, my voice barely audible now. "Tell me, did it taste as sweet?" And then I was gone, leaving them to grapple with the taste of their own cruelty, the bitter aftertaste of a meal they would never forget. I walked towards the shore, the sand cool beneath my feet, the sound of the waves a soothing balm to my soul. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a final breathtaking spectacle.